All right, so today we're going to be talking about the 2017 NDP leadership race that is currently underway. We're about, I guess, halfway through it, and we have now 4 people running for the leadership of the New Democratic Party of Canada: Nikki Ashton, Jagmeet Singh, Charlie Angus, and Guy Caron. It's a very different leadership race than we had last time in 2012 when Mulcair clinched the nomination. Back then, Nikki Ashton also ran in 2012, and she was actually eliminated on the first ballot. And this time around, according to the the only poll that was taken about who NDP voters are supporting, Nikki Ashton is within the margin of error for being in first this time around. I think still 30 to 40% of people aren't really sure who they're going to vote for, so that poll is basically meaningless. But nevertheless, it's an interesting, tidbit of information. Everyone loves polls.
There's been a bunch of surveys done, which are all sort of worthless, but I guess all I'd say from the polls and all that is that there's it's sort of still an open field between the remaining candidates.
Yeah, and I think just for our listeners out there that aren't totally familiar with the history of this or why this is happening, last federal election, the NDP at the time was being headed by Thomas Mulcair, a liberal from Quebec.
Former liberal from Quebec.
Provincial liberal. He's
former provincial liberal.
Yeah,
from
quick
Quebec
to point out. But anyway, the NDP were actually, for the first time in history, really ahead in the polls, and it looked like the NDP at the time was the official opposition, and it looked like we could have actually formed government. And Thomas Mulcair ran the most, let's say, centrist, right wing as far as the NDP is concerned, campaign focusing on balanced budgets and so on and so on. And they plummeted in the polls, and they, handily lost and were kicked back into third-party status. So it was, I think the membership of the NDP were really pissed off about that. I think we perceived Mulcair as having squandered our most important opportunity in the history of this party, that we could actually form government. And he just ran a really bland campaign, and Trudeau made a whole bunch of additional, what most considered, pretty left-wing statements like electoral reform and investing in infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So Trudeau managed to out-left the NDP, and we lost. And so the next party convention that was held within the NDP, Thomas Mulcair says, okay, let's have a vote. And if I get less than 75% of support within this party, then I'll quit and we'll elect a new leader. He got 48% at that convention and was handily defeated. So they set a time limit of 2 years to vote in the next leader. So he gave himself a nice long waiting period there.
Sure, as interim, temporary, permanent leader for life.
Yeah, and now this October is going to be the end of those 2 years. So we're actually coming to the point where the race is underway. They've had several leadership debates in mostly cities out east, and they'll be coming to Vancouver and Victoria later this year. So
should be interesting.
It will be interesting. I've never actually seen a live, political debate of that caliber before.
But yeah, to me, the thing isn't just that this current election inside the party isn't just interesting because it's going to be in Victoria or on the West Coast or whatever, but also because, particularly compared to the last one, but realistically compared to any NDP election I've ever seen or even really heard of, there seems to be some really clear, let's say just relatively clear, political disagreements and divisions both in the party and amongst the people running.
I mean, there's some clear polarization within the party at this moment, and that's in spite of, back when Jack Layton was leader, and even when Thomas Mulcair was, there was always this really big emphasis on party unity. At the last convention, when media reporters asked about divisions in the party, everyone was quick to say, oh, no, we're all united as one party, we're all friends, we're all buddies. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who ends up winning, we're all one big family. And now, this time around, it's a lot more polarizing, especially figures like Nikki Ashton, who's on the furthest of the left in terms of the candidates, and Jagmeet Singh, who I think most would consider furthest to the right or center, on the ground in terms of the supporters and what people are saying. A lot of people view Nikki Ashton as that she'll ruin the party, she's way too extreme, she's going to turn people away, etc. And then on the other side, you have Nikki Ashton supporters saying that Jagmeet Singh is way too bland, he doesn't represent anything, he's just like a good media figure, and he too would ruin the party, and but for completely different reasons.
Even when he first ran, it's been both said as a positive and a negative how similar he is in his media style to Trudeau.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of the main comparison. And the people who support him are going, yes, we need a professional person who can navigate the media and that the media will just love for whatever reason. Because if we don't have that, if we have someone like Nikki Ashton who could be treated with hostility from the media, then we would lose, right? And that's something I think the party's always been really, really paranoid about, and particularly members in the party have been paranoid about, is like this both an understanding that we generally get attacked in the media, but also just like an unending desire not to be. Like, if only we could win the media war, we'd win this or that election.
Yes, if only the media loved us as much as they love the Liberal Party, right?
Yeah. Well, that's and to be fair, I mean the logic is at least there in the sense that the Liberals are generally treated better in the media and they generally win elections relatively. However, that's just sort of I think that a lot of people who appeal to the media presence or even social media or things like that if we just sort of if we can get the right messaging, if we can just tell people in such a way that it's appealing to them, even if the content doesn't really change, that's how we can win. And I think that in the case of Ashton and a few other proposals that have been made by other candidates running, the argument seems to be that no, that doesn't really work. What we need are new, better ideas.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when talking about this is obviously Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, the media hates him.
He was fucking crucified in the media day in, day out. They didn't stop mocking him. He's unelectable. He's a crazy communist. Blah 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 blah. And they gained around 30 seats. They performed way better than expected. And at the end of the day, it didn't even matter what the fucking media said. And I would even say the opposite of what the Jagmeet Singh camp is saying. If the media is treating you well, you're doing something wrong. The NDPers and left-wingers are not supposed to be liked by the media that are owned by massive corporations. Their job is to protect capital and to fight anyone that puts that at risk. So, especially if the fucking National Post is saying anything remotely good about you, this is Jagmeet Singh.
This is what the NDP should do from the National Post.
Yeah.
And it's like, I remember an article by someone in the National Post that was suggesting that the NDP should just shut down. That was the advice they give.
Yeah.
And it always seems to me like that's generally the way a lot of this sort of quote unquote advice goes. Yeah. That we want the media to be nice to us, which is reasonable, I suppose. We want to be able to make get our message out there, that kind of crap. But it doesn't really matter ultimately, because I don't know how to put this, but quite often the NDP doesn't really have a very good message anyway. So, I mean, even if we were to be given all the time in the world to tell people what we think, we tend to just have not much to say most of the time.
Well, sure. I mean, the NDP as a party has for decades been obsessed with trying to appeal to moderate voters, try to be more friendly with the media, try to basically just be the Liberal Party, diet Liberal Party. And as it turns out, we already have a Liberal Party in Canada, and people would rather just vote for them.
Yeah, it's a lot more straightforward.
Yeah.
They know how to run government because they've done it before. They got all the smart and the people, they got the money, they got the resources, and they're generally liked in the media. So what the hell kind of argument can you make there? I think that there's a case to be made in the case of where the party's going. I do think that this election campaign has pushed the party more to the left, both because of Nikki Ashton, but also just generally because of the fact that Mulcair was kicked out. The party membership was and probably still is pissed off about losing, and losing for what has generally been seen as for right-wing capitulations.
Yeah.
To try to get those votes, and it absolutely doesn't work. And to my mind, that would be the simplest, argument. With these techniques don't work. You can't convince people to vote for something by being the sort of a blander version of someone who's already pretty vacuous anyway. It's not like the Liberal Party is proposing these astoundingly amazing policies and we're copying them. They're not very good, and we're just trying to sort of play catch-up with that. And we can't, and the NDP never will, and it never has either. But that's sort of the context, I guess, of this whole election campaign. I think that idea has been for more people in the perhaps not a majority yet, but we'll see where the votes actually end up at the end. But certainly a sizable minority of the party is strongly against that kind of policy anymore.
Yeah. It's been proven in spades that it doesn't work. It backfires. A lot of people are just frustrated that the NDP as a party has not in recent decades really expressed the views and the values that the rank and file membership wants, right?
But I think that's sort of the opening up, I guess, of debate inside the party that's happened.
Yeah.
Because of Tom Mulcair, essentially. Yeah. Both his defeat in the election and then his defeat as leader have really left kind of a vacuum that a lot of the left wingers in the party are trying to see if they can fill at this point. Because you can sort of paper over these disagreements. You can paper over how socialist or whether we should be a socialist party or social democratic or what those words even really mean. You can just say, hey, we're just all in this together. Let's just make Canada a better place, unity and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But the actual disagreements are still there. I mean, people do actually disagree over what the party is for and what it means and how do we address that. And I think that a lot of those disagreements are simply being expressed through this current campaign.
I think so too. Even though at the debates, especially the first debate that was had, I think the Beaverton put out an article that said something like NDP candidates come dangerously close to disagreeing with one another during the first debate. But as it's gone on, there's definitely more conflict there. And especially in terms of people asking what the fuck Jagmeet Singh actually thinks about the Kinder Morgan pipeline, she waffled on over and over again. It was really telling. During the St. John's debate, they introduced a new feature in the debates where the candidates could ask each other questions and then ask a follow-up question after that. Both Nikki Ashton and I think it was Charlie Angus asked Jagmeet Singh about, okay, what is your position on Kinder Morgan? You keep delaying this. The federal caucus is against it. The new NDP government of British Columbia is against it. The party membership is against it. Are you actually going to go against all of this and come out in favor of Kinder Morgan? Because it sounds like right now you're suggesting that you might. And he responded 4 times over and over again with, well, it's not a yes or no answer. We need a common sense approach that I'm going to talk to Rachel Notley in Alberta and I'm going to talk to John Horgan in BC and we're going to come to an agreement. Yeah, good fucking luck with that.
But they disagree, though.
Yeah.
They're not the pipeline will either be built or it won't be built. Yeah. Those are the two. It's binary in that sense. There's no middle ground. And I think that's when it comes to Jagmeet Singh and a lot of the politics of people like that, they're always looking for that middle road.
Yeah.
Like, what's the compromise where everyone can just get what they want?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, Alberta wants the pipeline and BC doesn't. That's it.
Yeah.
That is why there's a disagreement. That's why this is a problem.
You can't build it halfway and then call
and be like, well, there you go.
Or just have half a pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's a really good observation though. Like people like Jagmeet Singh, if you're a centrist, if you're a moderate, you're always going to be looking for that compromise. And so you end up giving these wishy-washy, nonsensical answers on questions that are fucking yes or no.
Well,
should it be built or not?
Worse than just being wishy-washy now, I expect he'll do what, I mean, Trudeau gave the same wishy-washy answers.
Yeah.
He was very much we'll just look into it. But I promise you, environmental, blah, 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 will be the first priority, and Aboriginal, blah, 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 will be important as well. And as it turned out, he still just approved it anyway.
Yeah.
And then said, yep, the environment's fine, and Aboriginal nations in the path of the pipeline support me, even if they don't necessarily do that.
Yeah.
It's all fine. The approval process worked. The system works. We're done.
Yeah.
It's over. It's going to get built.
No, Jagmeet Singh...
and I expect if Jagmeet Singh was in that decision, made that decision, the same thing would have happened.
Yeah, no, he's a lot like Trudeau. I mean, Jagmeet Singh, I have to hand it to him. He's really well-spoken. He's very articulate. He's very media savvy, but he doesn't say anything. We just need more love and courage. It's like, dude, I'm sorry, that doesn't pay people's rent. We actually need economic policies that help people. So actually, since he was previously criticized as being a political vacuum, an empty suit with nothing to say, he's actually put up quite a few policy proposals on his website. And I think at this point he has more, policy ideas than any on their website, at least, than any of the other candidates do. However, I find that a lot of it is just kind of boilerplate NDP stuff, like you couldn't and possibly disagree if you're a member of the NDP and you saw these, like, yeah, sure, federal $15 minimum wage. That's we've all been saying that for a long time. There's nothing new there,
Yeah.
So, well, I guess on one hand I commend him for actually filling in those gaps in his campaign. I still think he's a very vacuous political figure that represents everything that is wrong with the NDP and this kind of politics of centrism and just being really media savvy and friendly and having some good catchphrases, but not actually having anything of substance that binds you together. Jagmeet Singh seems to stand for everything and nothing both at the same time. At the most recent debate, his moderate centrism was on full display. When they were talking about the Senate and whether or not it should be abolished, he called it disgusting, and then he also proposed that we could keep it in some form. On the question of the long gun registry, he said, well, it depends on the province and region. There's not a one-size-fits-all policy. We have to take everyone's differences into account. On the question of emissions caps, he again said one size doesn't fit all. We have to leave it to the provinces. We have to take everyone's certain differences into account. He only took a stance against Kinder Morgan, for Christ's sake, when he realized that he was committing political suicide by not opposing it. In previous debates, he was saying, well, we need a common sense approach and blah, 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 blah. Singh is a liberal, I think, who is taking the path of least resistance. He's saying things that people want to hear, and he only decided to come up with policies when he was criticized for not actually having any or standing for anything in particular. In my opinion, the guy's basically an empty suit. Jagmeet Singh claims to be the growth candidate, the candidate that can attract the most new members to the party. But I think that, we ran a liberal in the last election, Thomas Mulcair, and we lost because we ran a centrist right-wing campaign. And if Jagmeet Singh wins the leadership race this time around, then I think in the 2019 elections we're going to lose for exactly the same reasons as last time, and be just as disappointed and frustrated as ever. We need someone like Nikki Ashton, who is unafraid to put forward an unapologetically left-wing principled campaign and platform.
Well, of the four candidates that are still running, I mean, you seem to dislike Jagmeet Singh for much the same reasons I kind of do. I dislike him. What about Guy Caron?
Guy Caron is a smart guy. He is from Quebec, which is good, so he clearly has the best French out of anyone there. He's really into universal basic income. That's his thing. That's his baby. And he's very policy and detail oriented, which I think is an asset. During the debate, Guy Caron in St. John asked Nikki Ashton a question about how her campaign has a lot of good ideas, but it doesn't have a lot of really specific things, you know. And I actually thought that was a decent criticism of Nikki Ashton's campaign that she's run so far. You know, she could get into more details, and she has fleshed out her tax policy, which I think is great. But Guy Caron is a real, you know, he really likes all those small details. There was an event when Guy Caron came here. He met with, I think it was in James Bay. It was a mostly older crowd, you know. Yeah. I think he had about 30 or 40 people show up, something like that. And he talked with them for a good, 2 or 3 hours. And, they all had really fucking specific questions about policy that could only really even, would affect them personally. They're so specific. But he was so good at answering those questions. That was great for him.
What are you going to do about the tax rate for someone who lives at 320 Quebec Street?
Yeah. But someone like Caron loves those kind of questions where it's oh, well, let's figure this out. Let's get into all the details, you know. Yeah. Whereas Nikki's more of broader statements about, well, if you privatize it, we'll nationalize it, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But no details on, well, what specifically are we nationalizing, you know. So, and I do think that's a valid criticism of her campaign, and it is something that could be worked on. But Guy Caron, he's smart, and I think that, he's definitely going to have a place within the party, even if he doesn't win the nomination. But I guess the only other person here is Charlie Angus. Charlie Angus is the guy from the four of them that I would like to sit down and have a beer with the most, you know?
He seems like the kind of guy who would win under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
If Tom Mulcair hadn't happened, changes in the party's attitudes, I think he'd probably just win.
Yeah, he's just a regular, down-to-earth
NDP, real long-term, involved in unions and in the NDP and blah, 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 blah. But I guess my criticism of him is just that it doesn't seem like he's really done... Jagmeet Singh's got a lot of people who are writing his policies for him, I assume.
I would think so.
I don't even say that so much as an insult, as much as just he seems good at the media and not at writing policy, so obviously he just gets someone who's good at doing that for him.
Yeah.
And Guy Caron knows this shit upside down and sideways, and Nikki Ashton's got a lot of principled positions, but Charlie Angus seems to just be sort of there now. Yeah. I'm running. Why? Because the NDP needs a unifying leader, and it seems of the four of them, he's the one that would have the least number of people who would hate him as leader.
Even me, he has, I think by far the least amount of detailed policy announcements out of any of them.
That's probably why people don't like him, or people don't not like him.
Yeah, because he hasn't said anything to piss anybody off. Yeah, I find the most notable thing about Charlie Angus is that every time he's asked a question, he always uses some regular old guy that I met at a bar, and he refrains to these stories of people he's met.
Folksy anecdotes?
Yeah, exactly. Folksy anecdotes is what I'm trying to say. And he doesn't actually go into any details at all. It's just kind of fluff, and I like the guy. He's funny and he's personable, and he's just kind of just a run-of-the-mill NDPer kind of person. But for that reason, I don't think he'd be a particularly good leader, especially in these current times when we have such polarized politics, and we have, we need someone to take a position on things and ride the wave of discontent that Canadian working people and students are feeling. I don't think he'd be particularly good, but like you said, he hasn't really said much, so I couldn't be mad if he won. There's two other people that previously joined the race and then dropped out. Most recently, Peter Julian. He seemed like a pretty decent candidate, although I found him very bland. And I guess other people did too, because he had a really hard time raising even a fraction of the amount of money that was required for him to continue his race.
He seemed like a lot of people's second choice.
Yeah.
Nobody really thought of him as the first person they'd vote for, but maybe on the second ballot. So who knows? Maybe he would have won. But
in the same way that Andrew Scheer kind of won in the Conservative race,
just sort of
snuck in there.
Fine, he's a decent fellow who's got some good ideas, and he's pretty left wing, and why not?
Now, what's interesting about him is that he hasn't endorsed anyone yet.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, going to make quite a big difference because there's a lot of people within the party that are really undecided as to who to vote for at this point.
Yeah.
And I guess there's still a few months to go and few more debates to be had to maybe hash out those differences. But Peter Julian did also agree with having free public education, post-secondary, like Nikki Ashton.
Yeah, it seemed policy-wise, Nikki Ashton and Peter Julian were the most similar.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to endorse anyone.
That's true. In fact, I think a lot of sitting MPs and MLAs right now have kept themselves out of this. You know, like they're not. Well, there's only been a few people that have actually made any endorsements.
Well, it's like we said earlier, where like there's not really been any substantial polling or surveying done at all. Just like the only way you'd know if anyone has any real support in the party is that they're still in the race.
Yeah,
that's it. And the 4 candidates who are still running because they know they've got the volunteer base and they're bringing in new members, and so they vaguely know that they've got some kind of support there. And Peter Julian just dropped out because he just just wasn't getting anyone.
Yeah.
So, and that's unfortunate, I guess. But yeah, I think a reason why people are MPs and whatnot aren't endorsing anyone is because it's not clear who can win at this, like, really unclear.
Well, you don't want to back the wrong horse, right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, right? It's all like, oh, we're all in the same party and we're all friends and it doesn't matter who wins. It's just about picking the best candidate of the best NDPer to lead the party. But then at the back of everyone's mind is like, well, if I don't endorse the right candidate, the person who does win will punish me for it. Like this sort of weird double think there of like, well, don't want to make the wrong choice.
Well, I mean, this whole party unity and everyone's friends, I think, was way more of a thing back in the last leadership race of 2012. This is a little bit different. I mean, like, the discourse is civil, the debates are friendly, but, there are clear lines within the party of people that really want to take a more left-wing position on things and people who really want to be more media savvy and moderate and catch the middle voters. Like that's ever fucking worked for us before.
Well, maybe it'll work this time.
Yeah, right.
And hey, when have we had a leader like Jagmeet Singh who was that charismatic before? Jack Layton. And we did really well.
That's true. We did get official opposition status
for a while.
And
then we had Tom Mulcair, who was going to be the next Jack Layton.
And he fucking broke everything.
Yeah, that is one thing that I think is really I've been kind of just disappointed by generally is that I don't know how, and I don't know even if like a leadership debate's an appropriate forum for this, but like the legacy of Tom Mulcair is still completely unaddressed.
Well, as you've said before, we basically took Thomas Mulcair's political career out behind the shed and shot it to death and just never spoke of it ever again.
Yeah, and that's funny, I guess, but ultimately, if this is supposed to be like a revitalization of the party, either for like a renewed effort towards the center or a renewed effort towards the left, whatever the goal here is, there's a lot of talk about like renewing the party, rebuilding the organization, getting us back in getting momentum behind us again. Like being unable to even just say like his name, is not a good thing.
No,
it's always just sort of this vague reference to some past mistakes. Who knows who did it? It's like you just showed up one day, like the NDP party headquarters, and everything was just a disaster. And it's like, oh, I don't know who made this mess. Got to clean it up.
Yeah. No, it's true. I think it's the kind of. I mean, Tom Mulcair is mentioned frequently by the NDP party members, but not in the debates, at all, and I think Nikki Ashton, she is positioning herself as the left-wing champion of the party right now, and she's herself has also made quite a few vague references to past mistakes. But yeah, no one's actually, and I agree with you. I think that's a debate that really needs to be had. We just should have a sit down and honest conversation about this. No hard feelings, but we just have to talk about it.
There's just no way to do that, though, in the party.
We can even just have Tom Mulcair in the audience audience listening, and the camera can just pan
Every
to him
time we mentioned
now.
we move too far to the right, it just cuts to his face. It cuts
Exactly.
back to... Because, you hear that. It's like, well, the last election, we just moved too far to the right. Or one thing I thought Nikki Ashton said that I didn't disagree... I agreed with the sentiment, I think, behind it. But when she said stuff like, we moved too far to the right as a party,
yeah.
I'm like, that's not what happened at all. The membership didn't move to the right.
Yeah.
That's not... We didn't go... We decided on a bunch of really right-wing shit and then tried to do it. It was Tom Mulcair and the majority of the MPs who basically just backed him no matter what during the election, who basically just said, sure, this is what it takes to win. Yeah. And they really believed that. And that was, I think, the major mistake that Jagmeet Singh and other people will probably eventually realize at some point, that this just doesn't work. It's not like I'm annoyed because Jagmeet Singh's a right-winger and he'll make a bad prime minister. I'm saying he's trying to imitate the Liberals, and as a consequence of that, will never be prime minister.
Yeah. Absolutely. I wonder, that fake quote that Einstein never actually said about insanity being doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result?
Yeah.
I feel that's exactly what the NDP has been doing.
Well, that's just politics, is repeating the same thing over and over again.
Well, in the case of the NDP, we keep, not we, the party membership, but the party brass, I guess, kept repeating the same campaigns over and over and over. We just need to be more, capture the middle voters. We can't be too extreme. We don't want to alienate anyone. When at the same time, we have great swaths of the Canadian voting population that don't even bother to go to the polls on election day because nobody's running a campaign that says anything meaningful or inspiring to them. And so the left wing of the party has been saying for fucking ever, hey, why are we trying to be liberals light TM? Let's actually just stay true to our roots and give people a reason to vote for us instead of, just trying to, instead of, whining when the liberals take, cherry pick some of our campaign, our platform, and then, campaign on it themselves, and then they win, and then we get all butthurt about it. Meanwhile, we were trying to be like them the whole time. So this has to end, and the NDP, in my opinion, really needs to try something different. For Christ's sake, the founding document of the CCF, which later became the NDP, it's the first sentence of it was talking about getting rid of capitalism as an economic system.
Sure. Socialism, abolishing the Senate, bunch of things.
Yeah. And that document from the CCF was called the Regina Manifesto, and I was really happy to hear Nikki Ashton actually mention it specifically during the last debate in the Prairies. Whether or not she'll actually incorporate any specific items from the Regina Manifesto remains to be seen, and let's cross our fingers for that. But nevertheless, I thought it was really awesome to hear her mention that specifically, because many of us within the NDP have been waiting a long time for a sort of return to our roots as a socialist party.
Well, when's the last time the NDP had a manifesto that it was even anyone bothered reading?
Yeah, sure. We've just made wishy-washy fucking whatever.
When's the last time we had a manifesto at all?
Yeah.
Any kind of positioning statement. This is what our party believes in. Here's what we're fighting for. Irrespective of elections, blah, 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 blah. This is what we want.
Well, that's the most important point right there, irrespective of elections.
Yeah.
We always, of course, the NDP has a platform, but it's always laden with, and the liberals are terrible, and the conservatives are terrible, and they did this terrible thing, which was terrible, and this also is terrible about the liberals, and the conservatives suck, and blah, blah, blah. No, dude, stop fucking throwing stones. Just get some ideas in order that are good, and put them on paper, and tell people about them.
I know, I found that annoying about the last BC election.
Yes.
Where, I was like, Jesus Christ, have you looked at the polls? Everybody knows Christy Clark's terrible.
Yeah.
People don't like her.
Yeah. You don't have to remind people of that. We're all on the same page here.
They also mysteriously don't like you either, but we'll get to that. We'll figure a way to fix that. But come on.
Half of the BC NDP's platform in the most recent election we had here was just anti-liberal propaganda, which is fine. But if we're talking about...
I've gotten worse things in the mail.
But yeah, sure. But I think what we're talking about here is the difference between an election platform and a fucking manifesto. You know, you're not going to have, like, Christy Clark did this bad thing wrong, terrible, bad in a manifesto. A manifesto is when you lay out a platform of ideas, a series of ideas that defines what you are as a party and what you want to do. And yeah, the NDP has been fucking silent on that for a long time.
Yeah, other than just sort of general principles that the party membership tends to vote in favor of during convention.
Sure.
Which, to be honest, even members of the party don't even really know about. I mean, a lot of this stuff, and even what we've been talking about generally, is, I think one of the major problems is how much of it is like this internally focused attempt at reform. And that's fine, because I do think the party does need to be internally reformed. But like you said, millions of people who aren't voting, millions of disenfranchised people across Canada that the NDP should be looking towards and trying to advocate for and bring into, you know, political action through the NDP, through social democracy and socialism and all those ideas. That's, to me, sort of the weak spot of this whole campaign, is that hasn't happened at all. Like, there has not been this broader mass movement either joining the NDP or joining any particular campaign in it. And maybe that's not something that needs to happen right now, because I'm not sure if the NDP is a party currently capable of even absorbing many tens of thousands of new members in any useful way.
Well, I mean, no one will ever know how many people are a part of the NDP.
That's one of the many problems with the party.
They never say that.
No,
they never
we're like a secret society, apparently. It's like, I've known many people who don't even know if they're still a member. Like, they pay, and it's like, I don't know. You don't get a response back, don't get a letter, don't get anything.
Yeah, it is notoriously difficult to communicate with the new Democratic Party. Like,
that stuff is all internal, and I think it does need to be reformed. And my ideal sort of result from this campaign is I'm going to be voting for Nikki Ashton, which is fairly obvious, I guess. But also that structure changes. In many ways, I don't care nearly as much about who the leader of the party is, as that the party has a structure that's capable of that kind of political debate. Yeah. And even just general, like, involvement outside. I don't care about campaign bullshit, right? I mean, yes, we should try to win elections, but we became so focused on that and have just been gutting everything else in the party that there's really no reason for anyone to join. I mean, people who ask me, why should I join the NDP? And it's like, geez, I don't know. I mean, other than when there's a nomination going on for leader, there really isn't a reason to join. Ever. Like, I could say you can go to convention and it's a lot of fun, but the fact of the matter is the leaders generally don't care what convention actually votes for. You can involve yourself in constituency association business, but that's usually just boring bullshit anyway. Beyond that, there's not really much else going on.
This is one of the reasons I'm in favor of Nikki Ashton in this case, because one of her priorities is turning the NDP into a more active mobilizing force. Yeah,
I think a focus does need to be on that.
Absolutely, she wants the NDP to get involved in campaigns, activism, even tenants unions, and organizing and mobilizing people to get like if there's a protest against the tar sands or a protest against this or that, the NDP's got to be there instead of just shying away and like saying some tar sands are bad. Like, you need to be on the ground with people.
Yeah, they're never. The NDP never, in an official capacity at least, ever seems to show up to any protests or anything at all.
Even though there's plenty of NDP voters.
You can get. It's ridiculous where you can get all the people who are members of the party in an area going to a protest, and even like the MLAs and MPs just showing up. Yeah. But that's it. Like, they just sort of happen to be there. Like, oh, well, I live in the area and there's a protest for X going on, and I believe in this protest, so that's why I'm here. It's like, so where's the party, though? I mean, what the hell is the party even for if it's never going to exist in a kind of organizational sense?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, isn't that the whole fucking point?
Yeah, you have a party so you can have a banner and
especially
a flag.
Especially for a left-wing party that has its roots in the labor movement. You got to be out there organizing, mobilizing, talking with people, being a part of the movement that's already occurring there. And then, we have And a lot of people that I think are working in activist groups and NGOs, advocacy groups, that kind of thing, could see a value in focusing their efforts towards the NDP instead. When they could see, hey, the NDP, they're representing the things that I want done. They're doing stuff, instead of just every time there's a fucking election sending me a million emails asking for more and more sums of money. Which
we want your money and we want your vote, and that's it.
And that's it.
And the rest, and every four other than that, you can fuck off. That is what basically most people will hear from the party.
Yep.
And then I don't think it's any surprise when people just go, "Oh, those fuckers, they're just like everyone else."
Yeah.
Because
we
are acting like everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of my favorite parts of Nikki Ashton's campaign this time around is a focus on that, and that's something that nobody else has been saying.
I think there's a real, particularly since the whole campaign has been pushed to the left for the most part. Mm-hmm. I'd say primarily because of Nikki Ashton running, but also because, as I said before, just the general context. And I think that similarly, this desire to see a party that actually functions as a political movement, I think will have some real strength behind it in many ways, regardless of who wins. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if the most vacuous candidate running, whoever it might be, ends up winning, I think there's still going to be a lot of discontent and a lot of a sense amongst the party membership that they can't just expect our loyalty anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good thing. One candidate we did not mention, who has also dropped out, was Pat Strogan.
That jackass. Yeah. I actually liked the guy at first. Like my first impressions of him was like the kind of guy that you'd like meet who's like chewing tobacco in a bar and like telling stories.
That's funny. My first impression of him was when he was saying he was leaving the election.
Well, you didn't watch any of the debates.
I didn't watch the debate he was in. No, I missed it. Oh, jeez.
Well, it was funny because the guy didn't make a single policy proposal. Seemed to be completely at odds with the values of the party. It was very questionable why he was running at all. And then out of nowhere, a few months down the road of him paying the $30,000 nomination fee, rage quits, slags off the entire NDP as being a bunch of corrupt, politics that didn't want me to win and they were interfering, blah, 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 throws a massive hissy fit, stomps out. Like at one point, he was saying that during the debate, the question was about unions and the labor movement. He said, well, the labor unions are the reason why young people can't get full-time jobs these days. So, like, whoa, do you know which political party you're running for there, bud? So, no, he seemed, I was perplexed from the first moment that he threw his hat in the ring of why he was even here at all. And then he, all of a sudden, just like that, he was gone. So... I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird how that works, eh? You say a bunch of stuff that pisses everyone off and no one wants to vote for you.
Yeah. Fancy that,
I'm not sure how did he have like a book deal or something he was just trying to promote? I mean, I know people do that quite often where it ends up being less about the campaign and more about just like public image stuff. Like, I'm an important celebrity and I'm just going to use this as a...
So, both Nikki Ashton and Jagmeet Singh had events here in Victoria recently, and they were two very different events. Nikki Ashton, both of them were packed full of people. There was, standing room only pretty much in both cases. So there was definitely a lot of momentum in both respects. Not necessarily everyone that attended each event was necessarily in favor of them or is going to vote for them, but nevertheless, there was a lot of interest in both cases.
Sure.
But with the Nikki event, she was very thoughtful in how she gave a speech and she spent a lot of time answering people's questions. She went through probably a dozen or maybe 20 questions from the audience.
Well, it was more than that. It was pretty much just until they sort of started to thin out a bit.
Yeah, and she really listened to people and gave pretty decent answers for them. And at the end of the event, there was just this crowd of people around her, and she talked to each and every person that wanted to talk to her and listened to their question and answered it thoughtfully. And, everyone, and eventually it took a long time for everyone to sort of like, peter out and leave. But by the end of it, she had talked to like every single person in there that wanted to speak with her. In the case of Jagmeet Singh, it was very different. It was in Quadra Village, and he had a big crowd of people there, and he gave a speech, and then he answered, I think, 4 or 5 questions from the audience, and then he was like, "Okay, see you everyone, I've got to go do my interview with the media, bye." And then he just kind of left to go talk to the media person and did a television interview, and then just left everyone in the room kind of... I wasn't there myself. I'm hearing secondhand about what happened, so it might not be exactly, but that's kind of the general gist of what I heard. So, he spent a lot less time listening to people and talking with them, and spent a lot more time making sure that he got media attention and got on television and got to talk to the reporter.
Well, that seems pretty consistent with everything else that we've heard from him.
Sure.
It doesn't seem to be all that surprising, really.
Well, especially because, when people are asking, especially like activists and stuff, ask really specific questions, like what is your position on this thing, or what is your position on that thing? And Jagmeet Singh, as a centrist moderate, has, as we've said previously in this podcast, has a really difficult time giving a clear-cut answer for a very simple question. Because, as a centrist, you're always trying to appeal to everyone. Everyone gets to win. We can all walk home happy and completely ignore the existing conflicts and disagreements that there are.
Sure.
So I think that's probably another reason why he didn't want to spend too much time talking with people and answering questions, because, well, what if you can't answer them well? So...
Or also just like, if he goes and does a good media interview, who knows how many votes that's going to get him, but say he gives a decent answer to this one person's really specific question. Maybe they'll vote for him. Who cares? That's just one person.
Yeah. It goes with the general position that him and his supporters take about just wanting to appear good in the media and get, as many people to like them as possible by saying as little as possible.
Yeah. Now, one interesting thing about all this is we talk about like the media and old school politics of, knocking on people's doors or having long periods where you can just talk to anyone and personal stuff, and Jagmeet Singh representing more of a more modern, media savvy campaign, perhaps. And yet, based on some results I've seen from some surveys, it would appear that Ashton actually has many more young people who support her than Jagmeet Singh does.
Yes, I think in the recent poll, she was the clear winner in terms of people in the youngest
had almost
age.
50%.
Yeah, basically.
Something like that.
Out of the 4 candidates, she had 50% out of the youngest age bracket. So she's clearly the campaign that young people are attracted to. And I think this is a really good thing, because a lot of the people that don't vote and the people that the NDP should be trying to communicate with and organize are young people, and we need to be inspiring the people that don't already vote. Young people is a great place to start there, right? And Nikki Ashton is the clear-cut winner in that respect. I would say a lot of the people that are supporting Jagmeet Singh are probably themselves young too, but according to this most recent poll, Ashton is a clear winner by
fewer.
far.
Sure. I just mean it's interesting that a candidate who's running a campaign that seems a much more traditional, like old school politics kind of thing, versus Jagmeet Singh's media presence based campaign is in fact appealing to young people more.
Well, yeah, because it's about the ideas.
Well, sure. And what I'm saying is like the stereotype of that ideas don't matter to young people and what they're interested in are memes.
Right.
Is I think at least partially wrong. Everybody likes a good meme, of course.
Any red-blooded Canadian can appreciate a good meme. No one's calling that into question here.
No, God, no. That's the last thing I would want to do is to even, call that into question. You're right. But I think that there is something to this that will probably be borne out in the second half of this campaign, because in many ways it's barely really started at all. Like, we've now gotten to the point where we actually have clear candidates.
Yeah.
That are like differentiated from each other in some way.
Yes.
Up till now, it's kind of just been like a hodgepodge of a bunch of people mostly agreeing with each other. And then Jagmeet Singh, well, I'm sorry, I mean like Pat Strogan and like a couple of like weird sort of Jagmeet Singh initially saying he's for the pipelines, and then that's all just gone now. So it all just sort of ends up back at this weird like just baseline of agreement. But now we're at a point where I think we can reasonably say, yeah, there are some real political disagreements here that go beyond even the individual people running.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I think that there's all sorts of kind of boilerplate NDP policies that all of the candidates are basically supporting, like the $15 an hour minimum wage and increasing taxes on the wealthy somewhat and blah blah blah.
Healthcare,
sure, healthcare is good and we should have more of it. Yeah, done. NDP, go. But I think a lot of the differences are actually in like sort of what emphasis they place on certain things, like should the party be mobilized, should we only care about what the media thinks, and like but also I think Ashton has come out with some her tax plan I think is really good. It's really detailed. She costs everything out. She calculates how much revenue are we going to generate from this, how much is this particular thing going to cost, and which is also something that Guy Caron in his minutia has also figured out for his. But yeah, I think that the differences are really like it almost feels like this is a battle for the soul of the NDP in a way. Am I being too dramatic? Maybe.
I mean, this is I think this more just speaks to the general situation of left-wing and social democratic parties around the world, that they're facing these crises of confidence within the parties and externally in elections more and more often. And while I don't think that this is like in and of itself a decisive conflict in the NDP, like regardless of who wins, as I said, I think that things are going to just be pushed further to the left. I do think it's just part of that broader sort of context of Bernie Sanders's and Cormann's and Mélenchon's and whatnot around the world.
Right.
Now, if that happens to mean that Nikki Ashton then can win, then that's great. If not, then we're still talking about a sort of a context in which left-wing politics has a much greater purchase anyway.
I do think that Nikki Ashton is the Jeremy Corbyn-esque figure and the Bernie Sanders-esque figure for Canada. She is the one that's taking the most strident left-wing positions and the one that wants to mobilize people and that sort of thing. However, we haven't actually seen a mass sort of movement forming around her in the same way that we saw with those other two, right? And I think that might just be the fact that Canada is in a different political situation than the UK.
Well, our economy's not quite that bad. And as I said before...
Yeah, the housing market hasn't crashed yet.
Well, not yet, but if it had, I think there would be a much bigger thing. I mean, Nikki Ashton could, in that case, could probably just win the nomination by saying, a public housing program.
Yeah,
that's what I'm in favor of. But what I think the other problem is, and this is something perhaps a little less objective and more subjective, is how much of the discourse has been, for internal consumption only, essentially. Like, so much of this is about, like, if you're already an NDPer, you're going to care about this. But anyone else ain't really going to care about a lot of the minutia of whose campaign policies have been written and when.
Well, to be fair, I don't think much of anyone outside the NDP has ever really cared very much about the leadership races that occur. So I don't think
that's not always the case. The whole point of these, the shift in politics is that attitude is changed. And that's not something that can be done through an NDP campaign, but only expressed through it. That mass movement doesn't exist yet, but I think eventually it will. If Nikki Ashton wins, then when that mass movement occurs, the NDP will be better prepared for it. And if she doesn't, there will at least still be a left wing that has in many ways revitalized by her campaign that will be able to form a core of that next movement.
I think so too.
So either way, I'm fairly optimistic.
Yeah. And, like, how fucking often can you say that in politics?
In 2017? A few times, actually. 2016 was the shit show.
It was. And we continue to...
17's been, well, not better, but less worse.
Yes. Well, I mean, Trump is still president, so fuck us,
He'll be president
right?
for the next 7 years.
Well, one question that I think a lot of people, I mean, it's not everyone that considers themselves a socialist on the Canadian left likes the NDP.
In fact,
let's say.
many of them don't.
Yes. So
perhaps even most.
So some of you listening to this right now might be thinking, what the fuck are you guys doing in the NDP?
And what I will say to those people is,
socialist.
What the fuck were you doing listening to this whole podcast waiting for us to get to this point? You're a real trooper.
Yeah, and yet here we are.
Here we are.
So, well, Mac, why don't you start? I think you'd give a better answer than I would.
Well, there's a billion different arguments for what shouldn't socialists do. I mean, it's practically a stereotype of socialists that we don't agree on anything.
Yep.
That's I think worth saying, at least. As far as why a person should support the NDP is because of those links with the labour movement. I think it's Canada's Labour Party. Disorganized though it is, so is the labour movement. Right-wing though it often is, so is the labour movement. I mean, in many cases, they're the same damn people that just sort of flip sides, and when one side loses, they move to the other, or in rarer cases, win. But still, anyway, yes, that's the main reason I think we should support it. And I think a socialist should be, generally speaking, interested in the labor movement, because that's where like the natural constituency of our ideas are. That's the whole reason I'm a socialist at all, anyway. Now, what that means in practice for someone, in this case, I'd say join the party and join Nikki Ashton's campaign and blah, 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 blah. That's fine. Anyone who says that there's just nothing interesting to do in the party most of the time, I'd actually probably agree with them. So I'm not telling anyone to waste their time. I'm just saying that if we're talking about what the NDP is, I do think it's a Labour Party. It's not a particularly good one, even given how bad most Labour parties around the world are.
Yeah.
But that's still the situation we have. That's, the tools we have in front of us.
And things can change, right?
And things can change. And I think that's important, too, to keep in mind.
Well, I mean, I think that the general argument of people on the left that disagree with joining the NDP because they're bureaucrats and right-wing and class traitors and blah, 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 whatever.
Yep.
We need to have our own political party that's true left-wing and says true ideas and things that are, okay, cool, we'll have fun with all that work and you're not going to get anywhere. You can have your tiny little events and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because most people on the left are going to be attracted to the NDP, and that's where the working class goes. That's where, if you want to fight out ideas, if you want to put forward new ideas of how you want to change the world, it's a lot easier to push the NDP to the left or be a part of that movement and influence the existing apparatus than it is to go off into the woods and do your own thing that's perfect and not compromised in any way, that's not actually has any links to society and the mass organizations that people are already a part of. That
gets to probably the broadest issue of all, which is sort of the Canadian working class in general. I mean, if you find the NDP to be unsatisfying, boy, I've got some bad news for you. The Canadian working class is no better.
What do you mean? I
mean, politically, I don't know how to tell you this, Ben, but many Canadian workers vote for the Conservatives. Can you imagine? What a den of, reactionaries the working class is. I just mean that, this kind of desire for purity, or to sort of cordon yourself off from infectious ideas and alien notions, is understandable in a period of sort of defense and trying to consolidate. But if you're actually trying to convince people that socialism is a good idea, you're going to have to talk to people who don't already agree with you.
Yeah.
That's it. And there's plenty of people who are interested in the NDP who don't already agree with those ideas.
Yeah.
But are nonetheless interested or sympathetic to it in some way or another. But that's sort of the situation the party's been in for a while. And what's interesting about this campaign, and I'd say sort of the capstone of all this, is just how this campaign has exposed a lot of these divisions, exposed this interest in new and better ideas. And while we may be playing catch-up with the likes of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn and others, I think it's a really good step in the right direction, the way this election's gone.
I think so, too.